Specialist Maria Torres moved through the base medical clinic with practiced precision, her hands sorting trauma bandages by expiration date, while mentally cataloging morphine dosages that would be critical in emergency situations. The afternoon sun streamed through reinforced windows as she arranged supplies according to a system that prioritized accessibility during mass casualty events, placing the most essential items within arm's reach of the primary treatment station. Each roll of gauze found its designated position based on sterile protocols she had memorized through countless real-world applications, though none of her fellow soldiers knew about those experiences. The inventory sheet in her left hand bore careful notations tracking not just quantities, but also the subtle variations in medical lot numbers that could indicate manufacturing inconsistencies affecting patient safety. Heavy boots announced Sergeant McKenna's arrival before his voice cut through the quiet efficiency of the clinic space. His bulk filled the doorway as he surveyed Torres's methodical work with obvious impatience, arms crossing over his chest in a gesture that communicated immediate disapproval. "You're moving too slow, Torres," McKenna declared, stepping into the clinic with the confidence of someone who believed speed mattered more than accuracy. "This inventory should have been finished an hour ago, and here you are still playing with bandages like some kind of perfectionist." The criticism struck Torres as fundamentally misguided, since her systematic approach prevented the kind of supply shortages that killed soldiers during medical emergencies. But she maintained her professional composure while continuing to verify expiration dates on critical medications. McKenna's impatience grew visible through the tightening of his jaw muscles and the drumming of thick fingers against his utility belt. If you're curious about military medical protocols and how they might apply in your area, whether you're in a rural community or urban setting where emergency response times vary, I'd love to hear your thoughts. The precision Torres demonstrated reflects training that saves lives in both combat and civilian emergencies. McKenna's frustration reached its breaking point as he watched Torres double-check medication dosages against protocol cards, and his massive hands suddenly gripped her shoulders with enough force to shift her entire body away from the supply cabinet. The physical contact violated military regulations regarding appropriate conduct, but his authority as sergeant seemed to override such considerations in his mind. "Stand aside and let me show you how this gets done efficiently," he commanded while positioning himself at the inventory station with the confidence of someone who believed rank automatically conferred medical expertise. His movements lacked the careful attention Torres had been demonstrating, grabbing supplies without regard for sterile procedures or systematic organization. Torres stepped backward to avoid further physical contact while observing McKenna's approach to the medical inventory, noting immediately that he was mixing expired medications with current stock and miscalculating morphine dosages in ways that could prove dangerous during actual medical emergencies. The mistakes accumulated quickly as McKenna prioritized speed over the accuracy that differentiated competent medical care from potentially fatal errors. Dr. Walsh emerged from his office at the sound of raised voices, his experienced eyes taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who had observed military medical operations for over 2 decades. The doctor's expression shifted subtly as he watched McKenna's careless handling of controlled substances and Torres's careful attention to proper protocols, though he chose not to intervene directly in what appeared to be a command issue rather than a medical emergency. The older physician's silence communicated volumes about the complex dynamics between medical expertise and military hierarchy, particularly when enlisted personnel possessed knowledge that exceeded their official rank or recognition within the unit structure. His knowing glance toward Torres suggested awareness of capabilities that McKenna either couldn't perceive or chose to ignore completely. McKenna completed his hasty inventory with obvious satisfaction, turning to face Torres with the expression of someone who believed he had demonstrated superior efficiency through speed alone. The medical supplies behind him bore evidence of his rushed approach through haphazard organization and several critical errors in medication classification that Torres had immediately identified. "Since you clearly need more basic training in proper military procedures, you can spend the rest of your shift cleaning equipment and organizing the storage room," McKenna announced while pointing toward the area containing basic medical tools that required sanitization. "Real medics handle inventory efficiently, and until you prove you can keep up with unit standards, you'll stick to grunt work that matches your current skill level. The assignment dismissed Torres's advanced medical training as irrelevant, while relegating her to tasks that any soldier could perform without specialized knowledge, effectively wasting the expertise she had developed through experiences McKenna couldn't begin to imagine. Other medics in the clinic exchanged glances that suggested awareness of the unfair treatment while avoiding direct confrontation with their commanding sergeant. Corporal Davis and Private Martinez witnessed the interaction from the adjacent equipment bay, their expressions revealing discomfort with McKenna's disrespectful treatment of a fellow medical team member whose quiet competence had impressed them during previous training exercises. The toxic command dynamic created tension throughout the clinic as medical personnel recognized the waste of Torres's obvious capabilities. Torres accepted the reassignment without argument, moving toward the cleaning station with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated during inventory work, though her mind remained focused on the critical supply errors McKenna had introduced into their medical readiness system. The professional restraint she maintained reflected training that emphasized mission success over personal recognition, even when facing commanders who failed to recognize genuine expertise. The afternoon progressed with Torres performing basic maintenance tasks while mentally tracking the medication discrepancies that could endanger soldiers during future medical emergencies, her quiet competence contrasting sharply with McKenna's loud confidence that masked fundamental gaps in medical knowledge. The stage was set for a crisis that would reveal the true depth of capabilities hidden beneath military rank structures and personal prejudices that prevented proper utilization of available expertise within the unit. The emergency klaxon shattered the clinic's routine 20 minutes before dawn, its urgent wail bringing every medical team member to immediate attention as base communications crackled with priority traffic from forward operating positions. Major Rodriguez's voice cut through the pre-dawn darkness over the facility intercom, summoning all available medical personnel to the briefing room for immediate deployment orders that carried the unmistakable urgency of lives hanging in the balance. Torres abandoned her equipment cleaning as McKenna rushed past her toward the briefing room, his earlier confidence replaced by the focused intensity that accompanied real medical emergencies where soldiers' survival depended on rapid response and proper medical intervention. The hallways filled with medical personnel, moving with practiced efficiency toward the central briefing area, their movements reflecting training that prepared them for exactly these moments when combat operations required immediate medical support. Major Rodriguez stood before a tactical display showing forward operating base Sentinel under sustained mortar attack, with casualty reports streaming in from multiple units engaged in fierce firefights that had overwhelmed the base's organic medical capabilities. Red indicators marked positions where wounded soldiers required immediate evacuation, while enemy fire patterns showed why standard medical helicopters couldn't reach the landing zones without significant tactical support. The situation report painted a grim picture of coordinated enemy assault designed to inflict maximum casualties on American forces, with preliminary reports indicating multiple traumatic amputations, penetrating chest wounds, and severe burns from improvised explosive devices that had targeted medical evacuation routes. Time constraints meant the medical team would deploy within 30 minutes aboard attack helicopters capable of reaching the combat zone despite ongoing enemy fire. Torres absorbed the tactical briefing while mentally cataloging the specific medical supplies required for treating combat wounds under fire, her experience with similar scenarios providing immediate clarity about equipment priorities that could determine whether wounded soldiers lived or died. The casualty descriptions suggested they would face complex trauma cases requiring advanced intervention techniques beyond standard battlefield first aid protocols. McKenna positioned himself prominently during the briefing, nodding confidently at tactical details while occasionally glancing toward Torres with expressions suggesting he expected her to struggle with the complexity of combat medical operations. His attention focused on command structure and deployment logistics rather than the specific medical challenges they would face in treating multiple critically wounded soldiers under enemy fire. After Major Rodriguez completed the tactical overview, Torres approached the casualty report display to study wound patterns and injury types that would determine their equipment requirements, immediately recognizing the need for advanced trauma supplies beyond the standard medical kit typically carried on evacuation missions. Her analysis identified specific items crucial for treating arterial bleeding, collapsed lungs, and traumatic brain injuries described in the preliminary casualty reports. The reports indicated at least 6 soldiers with life-threatening injuries requiring immediate surgical intervention, including 2 with severed arteries that would cause death within minutes without proper medical equipment, and 3 with penetrating chest wounds that demanded specialized tools for emergency treatment under combat conditions. Torres mentally prioritized supplies based on injury severity and probability of survival with proper medical intervention. McKenna interrupted Torres's medical analysis by announcing equipment assignments based on standard operating procedures, dismissing her specific recommendations about trauma supplies with the assertion that military protocols existed for good reasons and didn't require modification by individual soldiers. His equipment list followed regulation guidelines without accommodation for the specific injury types they would encounter based on the actual casualty reports. "You'll carry the standard medical load like everyone else, Torres," McKenna declared while checking items off a regulation list that failed to include several critical supplies Torres had identified as necessary for the reported injuries. Military medicine follows established protocols, not personal preferences or theoretical improvements that complicate proven systems. Torres accepted the equipment assignment without argument while quietly calculating which additional supplies she could carry in her personal gear, recognizing that McKenna's adherence to standard protocols would leave them unprepared for the complex trauma cases described in the casualty reports. Her personal equipment space allowed room for trauma bandages, emergency surgical tools, and medications that could save lives when standard supplies proved inadequate. The pre-deployment preparation moved rapidly as medical personnel gathered equipment and reviewed tactical procedures for operating under fire, with Torres discreetly adding trauma supplies to her personal pack, while other team members focused on standard evacuation protocols. Her additional equipment reflected understanding of combat medicine that went beyond regulation requirements to address real-world medical challenges. McKenna assigned Torres to assist-only duties during the mission briefing, explaining that experienced medical personnel would handle primary treatment responsibilities while she provided basic support that matched her perceived skill level. The assignment relegated Torres to observation and supply management rather than direct patient care, despite the shortage of qualified medical personnel for treating multiple critical casualties. "Your job is to follow orders and assist when directed," McKenna instructed while reviewing treatment protocols with more experienced medical team members. Complex trauma cases require steady hands and proven experience, not experimental approaches or individual initiative that could compromise patient care. The helicopter crews completed their pre-flight preparations as medical personnel loaded equipment aboard the aircraft configured for medical evacuation under fire, with gunship escorts providing tactical support for reaching the combat zone despite enemy air defense capabilities. Torres secured her equipment while reviewing emergency medical procedures that might prove necessary when facing injuries beyond standard training scenarios. During the flight toward Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Torres studied tactical medical references covering advanced trauma treatment, while McKenna dismissed her preparation as unnecessary since experienced medics would handle complex cases. The flight time provided opportunity for mental rehearsal of procedures that could save lives when facing the severe injuries described in the casualty reports. Radio communications from the forward operating base painted an increasingly dire picture as additional casualties mounted and enemy fire prevented previous medical evacuation attempts, with reports indicating that several wounded soldiers were approaching critical blood loss levels that would prove fatal without immediate intervention. The tactical situation deteriorated as enemy forces concentrated fire on medical evacuation routes and landing zones. McKenna's confidence wavered as updated casualty reports described injuries beyond his direct experience, including multiple soldiers requiring emergency surgery to survive the evacuation flight back to base medical facilities. The complexity of wounds described in the reports exceeded standard battlefield first aid procedures and entered territory requiring advanced medical knowledge and specialized equipment. Torres monitored radio traffic while calculating treatment priorities based on injury severity and probability of survival, her mental preparation reflecting training that emphasized rapid assessment and decisive action when treating multiple critical patients under fire. The mission ahead would test everyone's capabilities beyond their comfort zones and reveal the true depth of medical knowledge within their team. The helicopter's rotors churned dust clouds across forward operating base Sentinel as incoming mortar rounds exploded in thunderous sequences that shook the aircraft during its combat landing, forcing the pilot to drop rapidly toward the designated medical evacuation zone, while enemy fire tracked their approach with deadly precision. Torres felt her stomach lurch as the helicopter banked sharply to avoid a direct hit, emergency equipment rattling against bulkheads, while McKenna gripped his restraints with white knuckles that revealed his growing anxiety about the tactical situation. Explosive impacts cratered the landing zone as the aircraft touched down hard, immediately disgorging medical personnel into a combat environment where wounded soldiers lay scattered across defensive positions that offered minimal protection from the sustained mortar barrage. The acrid smoke of burning fuel mixed with cordite filled Torres's nostrils as she shouldered her medical pack and surveyed the carnage that exceeded even the grim casualty reports they had received during flight. McKenna emerged from the helicopter behind Torres, but stopped abruptly when confronted with the actual reality of combat wounds that transformed healthy soldiers into mangled casualties requiring immediate life-saving intervention. His face drained of color as he stared at a soldier whose right leg had been severed above the knee by shrapnel, arterial blood pumping onto the sand in rhythmic spurts that indicated massive blood loss approaching the point of irreversible shock. The sight of traumatic amputations and sucking chest wounds created by high-velocity fragments overwhelmed McKenna's mental preparation for medical evacuation duties, leaving him frozen in place while wounded soldiers around the landing zone called desperately for medical assistance that required immediate action rather than hesitation. Torres recognized the symptoms of acute stress reaction that paralyzed some medical personnel when confronting severe trauma for the first time in actual combat conditions. Instinct drove Torres toward the most critically wounded soldier, a young private whose sucking chest wound whistled with each labored breath, while his lips turned blue from oxygen deprivation that would cause death within minutes without proper medical intervention. Her hands moved automatically to seal the penetrating chest wound while assessing the patient for additional injuries that could complicate treatment efforts. Mental training taking over as combat medicine protocols engaged her muscle memory. McKenna struggled with basic triage protocols as wounded soldiers required simultaneous treatment that exceeded their available medical personnel, his decision-making paralyzed by the overwhelming nature of multiple critical casualties demanding immediate attention. The complexity of treating 6 severely wounded soldiers under fire revealed gaps in his practical experience with mass casualty events that required rapid assessment and decisive action rather than careful deliberation. Enemy mortar fire intensified as Torres worked to stabilize the chest wound patient, forcing medical personnel to treat wounded soldiers while incoming rounds exploded close enough to shower them with debris and sand that contaminated sterile medical supplies. The tactical situation deteriorated as enemy observers adjusted their fire based on medical team positions, specifically targeting areas where American medics attempted to save wounded soldiers. Torres completed emergency treatment of the sucking chest wound using specialized equipment from her personal medical kit, successfully restoring the soldiers' breathing while enemy rounds impacted within 50 meters of their position. The immediate improvement in the patient's oxygen levels demonstrated proper medical technique applied under extreme pressure, though additional casualties continued requiring urgent intervention that stretched their medical capabilities beyond normal limits. McKenna attempted to move a soldier with suspected spinal injuries by grabbing the patient's shoulders and dragging him toward the evacuation helicopter, completely ignoring proper spinal immobilization protocols that prevented additional damage to injured vertebrae. The technique violated fundamental combat medical training by risking permanent paralysis through improper patient handling during evacuation procedures, demonstrating dangerous gaps in McKenna's understanding of trauma medicine. Torres observed McKenna's critical error while treating her own patient and immediately intervened by blocking his movement of the spinal injury case, positioning herself between McKenna and the wounded soldier to prevent further medical complications. Her intervention required direct contradiction of McKenna's authority, but medical ethics demanded preventing additional harm to patients even when challenging superior officers during combat operations. "Stop, you'll sever his spinal cord," Torres commanded while gently repositioning the wounded soldier using proper spinal alignment techniques that protected damaged vertebrae from additional trauma. The patient requires cervical spine immobilization before any movement, and dragging him could cause permanent paralysis even if we save his life. The advanced combat medic techniques Torres employed revealed training that exceeded standard military medical education, including precise spinal immobilization procedures typically taught only to special operations medical personnel with advanced trauma certification. Her movements reflected experience with severe spinal injuries that suggested previous exposure to complex medical cases under combat conditions. McKenna stepped back from the spinal injury patient as Torres demonstrated proper immobilization techniques using specialized equipment from her personal medical kit, equipment that wasn't included in standard medical loads but proved essential for preventing additional injury during patient evacuation. The quality of Torres's medical intervention impressed other medics who recognized advanced procedures being performed by someone they had underestimated. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison observed the medical team's performance from his command position near the defensive perimeter, his experienced eyes tracking the stark difference between Torres's competent medical intervention and McKenna's obvious struggle with complex trauma cases. The base commander's assessment included recognition that Torres possessed capabilities far beyond her official rank or assignment within the medical unit structure. Artillery fire walked closer to the medical evacuation area as Torres completed spinal stabilization of the wounded soldier, her calm competence under direct enemy fire contrasting sharply with McKenna's visible stress reaction that compromised his ability to function effectively as medical team leader. The tactical situation required immediate evacuation, but patient stabilization remained incomplete for several critically wounded soldiers who needed additional medical intervention. Torres coordinated with other medics to establish treatment priorities based on injury severity and probability of survival, effectively assuming medical command responsibilities while McKenna struggled to process the overwhelming nature of multiple trauma cases requiring simultaneous intervention. Her leadership emerged naturally as team members recognized superior medical knowledge and decisive action under pressure. The wounded soldier with the spinal injury regained consciousness as Torres completed his stabilization, his eyes reflecting gratitude toward the medic whose intervention had prevented additional damage that could have resulted in permanent disability. Other wounded soldiers waited for medical attention, while incoming fire continued threatening the evacuation operation that required completion before enemy forces overran their defensive positions. McKenna's authority as medical team leader dissolved as practical necessity required competent medical intervention that superseded rank structure during life-threatening emergencies, with Torres assuming responsibility for complex cases while he focused on basic support tasks that matched his demonstrated capabilities. The combat environment revealed true medical expertise regardless of official positions or preconceived notions about individual soldiers' abilities. Enemy fire intensified as medical evacuation operations continued under increasingly dangerous conditions, forcing rapid completion of patient stabilization before tactical withdrawal became necessary to prevent additional American casualties. Torres maintained focus on medical priorities while coordinating evacuation procedures that would transport all wounded soldiers to advanced medical facilities capable of definitive trauma care beyond battlefield intervention capabilities. The soldier's abdominal wound opened like a grotesque flower as shrapnel fragments had torn through his stomach wall, spilling intestinal contents onto the dusty ground, while his blood pressure plummeted toward the critical threshold that separated potential survival from inevitable death. Private Jackson's face turned ashen gray as hemorrhagic shock began shutting down his vital organs, his pulse weakening to barely detectable levels that indicated massive internal bleeding requiring immediate surgical intervention to prevent fatal blood loss. Torres knelt beside Jackson while assessing the penetrating wound that had lacerated his hepatic artery, recognizing immediately that without emergency surgery to control internal hemorrhaging, the young soldier would die within minutes regardless of any other medical intervention they could provide. The complexity of abdominal trauma demanded advanced surgical techniques far beyond standard battlefield first aid, requiring someone willing to perform invasive procedures under combat conditions. McKenna approached the wounded soldier but recoiled when he observed the severity of Jackson's injuries. His medical assessment concluding that the case exceeded their field capabilities and represented an impossible situation that would waste precious time and resources. The sight of exposed internal organs and massive blood loss triggered McKenna's decision to prioritize patients with better survival chances rather than attempting complex interventions that might fail completely. "He's too far gone, Torres," McKenna announced while backing away from Jackson's position toward other wounded soldiers whose injuries appeared more manageable. "We need to focus on the ones we can actually save instead of wasting time on cases that are already hopeless, especially with limited supplies and enemy fire still incoming." Torres ignored McKenna's assessment while opening her personal medical kit to retrieve surgical instruments that weren't included in standard field medical equipment, her hands moving with practiced precision as she prepared to attempt emergency abdominal surgery under conditions that would challenge even experienced trauma surgeons. The decision to operate reflected training that emphasized aggressive intervention when dealing with potentially survivable wounds regardless of their complexity. The hemorrhaging required immediate control through direct surgical intervention, forcing Torres to make an incision that would allow access to damaged blood vessels while working under primitive conditions that offered no sterile environment or proper lighting. Her surgical technique reflected advanced training in emergency procedures typically reserved for special operations medics with extensive trauma experience beyond standard military medical education. Jackson's vital signs deteriorated rapidly as Torres worked to locate and repair the severed hepatic artery, his pulse becoming thready while blood loss approached the point where even successful surgery might not restore sufficient circulation to maintain life. The emergency procedure demanded absolute precision under extreme pressure, with enemy mortar fire continuing to impact near their position while she performed delicate vascular repair using improvised surgical techniques. Torres successfully clamped the damaged artery using hemostatic agents and surgical techniques that immediately reduced internal bleeding, allowing Jackson's blood pressure to stabilize at levels compatible with survival during evacuation to advanced medical facilities. The emergency surgery demonstrated capabilities that amazed other medical personnel who witnessed complex trauma intervention being performed under impossible field conditions. McKenna observed Torres's successful surgical intervention with growing recognition that her medical abilities exceeded anything he had witnessed during previous combat operations, though he struggled to reconcile this competence with his earlier assessment of her capabilities. The quality of emergency surgery being performed under fire revealed training that suggested extensive experience with advanced trauma cases. Sergeant Williams collapsed suddenly as his compromised airway finally blocked completely, throat trauma from blast fragments swelling to prevent any air exchange, while his oxygen levels dropped toward brain damage thresholds that would cause irreversible neurological injury within minutes. The airway obstruction demanded immediate cricothyrotomy to bypass damaged throat tissues and restore breathing before hypoxia caused permanent disability or death. Torres recognized the airway emergency while completing Jackson's abdominal surgery, immediately shifting her attention to Williams, who required a different type of emergency intervention that would test surgical skills under even more demanding time constraints. The cricothyrotomy procedure involved cutting through throat cartilage to insert an emergency breathing tube, a technique requiring precise anatomical knowledge and steady hands despite combat stress. McKenna approached Williams's position but stopped when he realized the soldier needed emergency cricothyrotomy, a procedure he had studied in medical training but never performed on actual patients during his military service. His hesitation reflected honest assessment of his limitations rather than cowardice, though the admission undermined his authority as medical team leader when life-saving intervention required immediate action. I've never done a crick on a live patient, McKenna admitted while stepping aside to allow Torres access to Williams, his professional honesty acknowledging that attempting unfamiliar procedures could cause additional harm during medical emergencies. You'll have to take this one, Torres, because I don't want to kill him through inexperience when someone more qualified is available. Torres positioned herself beside Williams while preparing surgical instruments for emergency airway establishment, her movements reflecting familiarity with cricothyrotomy procedures that suggested previous experience with similar cases under combat conditions. The technique required precise incision through throat cartilage followed by tube insertion that would restore breathing if performed correctly, but could cause fatal bleeding if executed improperly. The emergency airway procedure demanded absolute precision as Torres made the necessary incision through Williams's cricothyroid membrane, carefully avoiding major blood vessels while creating an opening large enough for emergency tube insertion. Her surgical technique demonstrated advanced airway management skills that exceeded standard combat medic training, suggesting specialized instruction in emergency procedures reserved for elite medical personnel. Williams's oxygen levels improved immediately as Torres completed the cricothyrotomy, restoring adequate air exchange that prevented brain damage from prolonged hypoxia while stabilizing his condition for evacuation to advanced medical facilities. The successful emergency procedure impressed watching medics who recognized the complexity of performing delicate throat surgery under combat conditions without proper surgical equipment. Corporal Martinez and Private Chen began following Torres's medical assessments instead of waiting for McKenna's direction, recognizing that her demonstrated expertise exceeded anything they had witnessed during previous medical operations. The natural shift in medical authority reflected practical necessity when facing complex trauma cases that required advanced intervention beyond standard protocols. Torres coordinated treatment priorities for remaining wounded soldiers, while McKenna accepted his supporting role in medical operations that demanded capabilities beyond his demonstrated skill level, the combat situation revealing true medical expertise regardless of official rank structure. Other medics deferred to Torres's clinical judgment when treating patients whose injuries required advanced intervention techniques. The medical team operated with improved efficiency as Torres assumed primary responsibility for complex cases while directing other personnel in supportive roles that maximized their available capabilities, her leadership emerging through competent medical intervention rather than formal authority. McKenna contributed effectively when following Torres's medical assessments instead of attempting to direct operations beyond his expertise. Enemy fire began to slacken as American forces gained tactical advantage in the firefight, allowing medical evacuation operations to proceed with reduced risk while wounded soldiers received continued treatment from the reorganized medical team. Torres maintained focus on patient stabilization while coordinating evacuation procedures that would transport all casualties to advanced trauma centers capable of definitive medical care. Jackson regained consciousness as Torres's emergency surgery succeeded in controlling his internal bleeding, his improved vital signs demonstrating that aggressive medical intervention could save lives even under the most challenging combat conditions. The successful outcome validated Torres's decision to attempt complex surgery despite McKenna's initial assessment that the case was hopeless. Williams breathed easily through his emergency airway as Torres completed final adjustments to the cricothyrotomy tube, ensuring proper placement that would maintain adequate oxygenation during helicopter evacuation to base medical facilities. The emergency procedure had prevented permanent brain damage while demonstrating advanced medical capabilities that impressed everyone who witnessed the successful intervention. The wounded soldiers stabilized under Torres's medical direction, while other team members prepared evacuation equipment, their improved condition reflecting competent trauma care applied under extreme conditions by someone whose true capabilities had finally emerged through crisis situations. McKenna observed Torres's medical leadership with growing respect for expertise he had previously failed to recognize or appreciate properly. The mortar round's detonation sent a shockwave through the medical evacuation area as enemy forces concentrated their final barrage on American positions, the explosive impact occurring close enough to McKenna's location that shrapnel fragments tore through his body armor and inflicted devastating wounds across his chest and left leg. Torres looked up from treating Williams to see McKenna thrown backward against medical supply containers, his uniform darkening rapidly with arterial blood that indicated life-threatening injuries requiring immediate intervention. Jagged metal fragments had penetrated McKenna's chest cavity between protective plates, creating a pneumothorax that collapsed his left lung while simultaneously severing the femoral artery in his upper leg, where shrapnel had sliced through major blood vessels. The combination of respiratory distress and massive hemorrhaging created a medical emergency that would cause death within minutes unless someone possessed the advanced trauma skills necessary to address multiple critical injuries simultaneously. McKenna's breathing became labored and shallow as his punctured lungs struggled to maintain adequate oxygen exchange, while blood loss from his severed femoral artery created expanding pools beneath his position that demonstrated the severity of vascular damage. His face turned pale as hemorrhagic shock began affecting his cardiovascular system, vital signs deteriorating rapidly toward the threshold where even successful medical intervention might not prevent fatal complications. Torres faced an immediate moral decision that tested her professional ethics against personal feelings about McKenna's previous treatment of her capabilities and medical expertise. The man who had dismissed her knowledge, physically shoved her aside, and relegated her to basic tasks now required advanced trauma intervention that only she possessed the skills to provide under these primitive field conditions. Other wounded soldiers around the evacuation area also needed continued medical attention, creating competing demands for Torres's time and expertise, while McKenna's condition deteriorated toward the point where delay would make successful intervention impossible. The ethical choice involved prioritizing patients based on medical needs rather than personal relationships or past conflicts that had shaped their professional interactions. Torres moved immediately toward McKenna's position while retrieving advanced trauma equipment from her personal medical kit, her decision reflecting medical professionalism that placed patient welfare above personal considerations or justified resentment about previous mistreatment. The choice demonstrated character traits that separated competent medical personnel from truly exceptional practitioners who maintained ethical standards under extreme pressure. McKenna's pneumothorax required emergency chest tube insertion to reinflate his collapsed lung, a procedure demanding precise anatomical knowledge and surgical skill to avoid damaging major organs while restoring proper respiratory function. Torres positioned herself beside McKenna while preparing sterile instruments for thoracic surgery that would challenge her capabilities even under ideal conditions, much less during combat operations. The chest tube insertion required Torres to make a precise incision between McKenna's ribs, carefully navigating around vital structures while inserting drainage equipment that would allow his collapsed lung to re-expand and restore adequate breathing. Her surgical technique reflected advanced thoracic procedures typically performed only by trauma surgeons or specially trained combat medics with extensive emergency medicine experience. McKenna's severed femoral artery demanded simultaneous attention as massive blood loss threatened to cause irreversible shock before chest tube placement could be completed, forcing Torres to perform multiple complex procedures while working against time constraints that allowed no margin for error. The arterial repair required microsurgical precision to reconnect damaged blood vessels while maintaining adequate circulation to his injured leg. Torres successfully inserted the chest tube using proper sterile technique despite primitive field conditions, immediately restoring McKenna's respiratory function as his collapsed lung began reinflating with audible improvement in air exchange. The emergency thoracic procedure demonstrated advanced medical capabilities that impressed watching personnel who recognized the complexity of performing chest surgery under combat conditions. McKenna regained consciousness as his breathing improved, his eyes focusing on Torres with growing recognition that she was performing medical procedures far beyond standard combat medic training. The quality of surgical intervention he was receiving suggested advanced trauma certification that contradicted his previous assessment of Torres's capabilities and medical background. The arterial repair demanded Torres's complete concentration as she worked to reconnect McKenna's severed femoral artery using microsurgical techniques that required steady hands despite ongoing enemy fire in primitive working conditions. Her vascular surgery reflected specialized training in advanced trauma medicine that exceeded anything taught in standard military medical programs. "Who trained you to do this level of trauma surgery?" McKenna whispered as Torres completed arterial anastomosis that successfully restored circulation to his injured leg, the precision of her surgical technique revealing medical expertise that suggested extensive experience with complex combat injuries. The quality of care he was receiving exceeded what he would expect from most trauma surgeons, even under ideal hospital conditions. Torres focused on completing McKenna's vascular repair while considering how much to reveal about her background, recognizing that her medical intervention had demonstrated capabilities that demanded explanation beyond standard military medical training. The successful arterial surgery had saved McKenna's leg and possibly his life, creating a situation where honesty about her qualifications seemed appropriate. Special Operations Medic, 2 deployments with Delta Force Medical Team. Advanced Trauma Certification from Military Medicine Institute. Torres explained while monitoring McKenna's vital signs for signs of complications from his chest and vascular injuries. "I've been treating combat wounds like yours for the past 4 years, including situations where field surgery was the only option for keeping soldiers alive." McKenna's understanding finally crystallized as he processed the revelation that Torres possessed elite medical training far exceeding his own capabilities, her background explaining the advanced procedures she had demonstrated throughout their deployment to Forward Operating Base Sentinel. The recognition that he had dismissed and mistreated someone with superior qualifications created profound regret about his previous professional conduct. The Purple Heart recipient status Torres mentioned explained her calm competence under fire and familiarity with complex combat medical scenarios. Her previous wounds received while treating casualties under enemy fire during special operations missions that demanded the highest levels of medical expertise. McKenna realized that he had been working alongside one of the military's most qualified combat medics without recognizing her extraordinary capabilities. Torres completed McKenna's medical stabilization while explaining that her assignment to their unit was part of a classified assessment program designed to evaluate base medical readiness and training protocols. Her presence intended to identify weaknesses in standard medical procedures rather than to serve in a subordinate capacity. The revelation explained why someone with her qualifications had been assigned to basic medical duties that seemed beneath her obvious expertise. McKenna's vital signs stabilized as Torres's emergency medical intervention successfully addressed his life-threatening injuries, his survival depending entirely on surgical procedures that only her advanced training had made possible under field conditions. The debt he owed to Torres's expertise was accompanied by growing shame about his previous treatment of someone whose qualifications exceeded his own by significant margins. "Your assessment was correct about the medication inventory errors I made yesterday," McKenna admitted as Torres monitored his recovery from emergency surgery, his recognition of her superior knowledge extending beyond the immediate medical crisis to their previous professional interactions. "I should have listened to your expertise instead of dismissing knowledge that could have improved our medical readiness protocols." Torres accepted McKenna's acknowledgement with professional grace, while continuing to monitor his condition for potential complications from emergency surgery performed under less than ideal circumstances, her focus remaining on medical priorities rather than personal vindication about past conflicts. The successful outcome demonstrated that competent medical care transcended personal relationships and professional hierarchies when lives hung in the balance. Other medics gathered around McKenna's position to observe Torres's advanced trauma procedures, their recognition of her exceptional medical capabilities spreading throughout the team as word of her background and qualifications became known. The revelation transformed their understanding of Torres from underestimated subordinate to respected medical expert, whose presence elevated their overall capabilities. McKenna's recovery progressed steadily as Torres's emergency surgery proved successful in addressing his critical injuries, his survival serving as tangible evidence of the advanced medical expertise that he had failed to recognize or appreciate during their previous interactions. The life-saving intervention created a profound shift in their professional relationship based on demonstrated competence rather than superficial assessments or rank-based assumptions about individual capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison reviewed the after-action reports from Forward Operating Base Sentinel while the medical evacuation helicopters powered down on the landing pad, their successful mission having transported all wounded soldiers to advanced trauma care facilities where definitive treatment could address injuries that exceeded field medical capabilities. The mission debriefing documents highlighted exceptional medical performance under fire that had saved multiple lives through advanced procedures performed under impossible combat conditions. Torres completed final patient transfer protocols while ensuring continuity of care information reached trauma surgeons who would continue treating the soldiers she had stabilized during combat operations. Her detailed medical documentation reflecting thorough understanding of trauma medicine requirements. McKenna observed from his stretcher as Torres coordinated with receiving medical personnel, her professional competence evident in every interaction with hospital staff who recognized her advanced medical expertise. The base commander's preliminary assessment identified Torres's performance as extraordinary even by special operations standards, her medical interventions having prevented multiple combat deaths through surgical procedures that challenged the capabilities of even experienced trauma surgeons. Harrison's investigation into Torres's background revealed classified information that explained her exceptional performance while raising questions about why someone with her qualifications had been assigned to basic medical duties. Defense Department records disclosed Torres's complete service history, including Purple Heart recipient status earned during previous special operations deployments, where she had treated casualties under enemy fire, her combat medical experience spanning multiple theaters of operation that demanded the highest levels of medical expertise. Additional documentation revealed instructor qualifications at the military's premier trauma medicine training facility, where she had developed advanced combat medical protocols. McKenna learned during his own medical evaluation that Torres had been specifically assigned to their unit as part of a classified assessment program designed to evaluate base medical readiness and identify training deficiencies that could compromise soldier survival during actual combat operations. Her presence represented strategic military medicine evaluation rather than routine personnel assignment, explaining why someone with elite qualifications appeared to be underutilized in standard medical roles. The assessment program required Torres to observe unit medical operations without revealing her background, allowing honest evaluation of existing protocols and personnel capabilities under normal operational conditions rather than the enhanced performance that typically occurred when superior officers knew they were being evaluated. Her months of careful observation had identified critical weaknesses in medical training and supply protocols that compromised their readiness for mass casualty situations. Harrison convened a formal recognition ceremony in the base conference room, where senior medical officers gathered to review the mission outcomes and acknowledge exceptional performance that had prevented American combat deaths through competent medical intervention under fire. Torres received formal commendation for medical excellence that exceeded military standards while demonstrating leadership capabilities that merited immediate promotion consideration. The ceremony recognized Torres's successful treatment of multiple life-threatening combat injuries, including emergency abdominal surgery, cricothyrotomy procedures, and complex vascular repair performed under enemy fire using improvised surgical techniques. Her medical interventions had achieved survival rates that exceeded historical combat medicine statistics, demonstrating that advanced training and proper equipment utilization could significantly improve battlefield medical outcomes. McKenna attended the recognition ceremony despite his own injuries, his presence reflecting genuine respect for Torres's medical expertise and desire to publicly acknowledge the professional mistakes he had made in assessing her capabilities. The formal setting provided appropriate venue for addressing the command failures that had nearly prevented optimal utilization of available medical expertise during critical operations. Torres accepted recognition for her medical performance while emphasizing the collaborative nature of combat medicine that required effective teamwork rather than individual heroism, her comments demonstrating leadership qualities that impressed senior officers evaluating her potential for advanced medical command positions. The recognition ceremony concluded with assignment of Torres to develop improved combat medical training protocols based on lessons learned during recent operations. After the formal ceremony, McKenna approached Torres privately to deliver a personal apology that acknowledged his professional failures in recognizing her medical expertise and treating her with appropriate respect due to qualified medical personnel. His apology addressed specific incidents, including physical displacement during inventory procedures and dismissive treatment that had undermined team cohesion and medical readiness. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on rank and appearance instead of observing your actual medical knowledge and professional competence, McKenna admitted while facing Torres directly to demonstrate sincerity about acknowledging his mistakes. My behavior was unprofessional and undermined our medical team's effectiveness when we needed maximum capability utilization for soldier safety and mission success. Torres accepted McKenna's apology with grace that reflected professional maturity and understanding that command mistakes represented learning opportunities rather than permanent character flaws, her response demonstrating leadership qualities that emphasized improvement over punishment. She offered to collaborate with McKenna in developing enhanced medical training programs that would prevent similar assessment errors in future personnel evaluations. The conversation between Torres and McKenna established foundation for improved professional relationship based on mutual respect and honest acknowledgement of individual strengths and limitations rather than assumptions about capabilities derived from superficial characteristics. Their collaboration would enhance overall unit medical readiness through better integration of available expertise regardless of rank structure or traditional command hierarchies. 3 weeks later, Torres conducted advanced trauma medicine training in the base medical facility, with McKenna participating as an eager student who recognized the opportunity to improve his medical capabilities under instruction from one of the military's most qualified combat medics. The training session demonstrated complete transformation of their professional relationship from conflict to mutual respect and collaborative learning. Torres explained complex trauma procedures using patient scenarios that reflected actual combat medical challenges. Her instruction methodology incorporating lessons learned from multiple special operations deployments where advanced medical intervention had saved lives under impossible field conditions. McKenna absorbed the training with genuine enthusiasm for improving his medical knowledge and capabilities. The medical training exercise covered emergency surgical procedures, including chest tube insertion, arterial repair techniques, and advanced airway management that had proven crucial during their recent combat medical operation at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Torres's instruction provided other medical personnel with advanced skills that would improve their capabilities for treating complex combat injuries during future deployments. McKenna demonstrated newfound respect for Torres's medical expertise by following her instruction carefully and acknowledging areas where his knowledge required improvement, his attitude reflecting genuine commitment to professional development rather than defensive resistance to constructive feedback. The collaborative learning environment enhanced overall unit medical readiness through improved training and knowledge sharing. Other medical personnel observed the positive working relationship between Torres and McKenna, recognizing that professional conflicts could be resolved through honest acknowledgement of mistakes and commitment to improve performance based on actual capabilities rather than preconceived assumptions. The transformation provided model for addressing similar personnel issues throughout military medical units. Torres concluded the training session by emphasizing that combat medicine required continuous learning and adaptation to new challenges, with every medical professional contributing valuable skills regardless of rank or experience level when integrated properly into cohesive medical teams. Her leadership approach encouraged individual growth while maintaining high standards for medical competence and professional conduct. The medical unit operated with enhanced effectiveness as Torres's advanced training improved overall capabilities, while McKenna's transformed attitude created more collaborative working relationships that optimized utilization of available medical expertise. Their partnership demonstrated that professional conflicts could strengthen teams when resolved through honest communication and mutual respect for demonstrated competence. If you've experienced situations where someone's capabilities were initially underestimated or where professional conflicts were resolved through demonstration of expertise, I'd be interested in hearing how those experiences shaped your understanding of leadership and teamwork. Torres's story reflects broader lessons about recognizing talent and maintaining professional standards that apply in many different contexts. Base medical operations continued with improved protoc. OLs developed through Torres's assessment findings and enhanced training programs that prepared medical personnel for complex combat scenarios requiring advanced intervention techniques, ensuring that future medical emergencies would benefit from lessons learned through their challenging but ultimately successful mission at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, where competent medical care had saved lives through professional excellence that transcended rank structure and personal conflicts.